Good morning, everybody. This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. I wanted to go over one of my all-time favorite dyno mules and all-time favorite Cleveland builds for this week. So for this video, we're going to be going over the details of the 354 cubic inch Cleveland dyno mule. So stay tuned. So every so often, I like to, if I'm trying to get my feet wet in a particular combination, or if I'm trying to discover new things or try new things, I will build a dyno mule for myself. And I do this fairly often, and I've done it with Windsors and Clevelands and FEs, and sometimes multiple iterations of in a particular engine family. So this particular combination was a Cleveland, and I was able to scrounge up a block, a set of 4-barrel quench heads, and some other parts. So if you know me at all, you know that I like or favor the smaller cubic inch high revving engines. So I've done the 352 FE, Junkie Junk. I've done the this 354 cubic inch Cleveland, a 311 cubic inch small block Ford, another 390 FE, and doing a Coyote right now. So I just like the sound and the higher RPM builds, and trying to see what kind of power that I can get out of a small displacement. Everybody can get big numbers out of a big engine, but you really learn a lot more when you take a small engine and really try to wring it out. And you even learn more than that when you don't really have to spin them to the moon. So, there are small cubic inch engines that are turning, 9 and 10,000 RPM. Obviously, those are limited use for the street, and RPM makes horsepower, but in my mind, somewhere there's a happy medium between RPM and a somewhat streetable horsepower rating. So, as with all my engines, the block is the foundation for every build. So, if you have a budget, spend the most money on getting the block machined correctly, because you can always build off of that later. If you have a correctly machined block, you can always upgrade the cam, you can always upgrade the heads, you can always upgrade the intake manifold, but it's a whole lot harder to strip everything down to bare bones and make machine work correct. So with every build that you start, the block needs to be at least honed with torque plates, if not bored and then honed with torque plates. The mains need to be aligned, and the decks need to be squared and made flat and perfectly square in every direction. So if you are relying on the accuracy of what Ford did 30 and 40 years ago, you will be sorely disappointed. I have seen FE blocks that have been out 20 and 30 thousandths from end to end on the same deck. So that means that one piston would be at zero deck, and one piston could be out of the hole 30 thousandths or down in the hole 30 thousandths. And as you can ascertain from that, compression ratio would be greatly different from cylinder to cylinder, as would piston to head clearance and a number of other variables. So make sure your block is dead nuts on before you do anything else. Decks are squared, mains aligned, cylinders straight round. If you do a lot of work with Cleveland stuff, you know that the cylinders are thin. So Ford never seemed to get things right back in the 60s and 70s. The Cleveland blocks had stout mains, but the cylinders were thin. The Windsors had thick cylinders, but the mains were thin. So a Cleveland will have very thin cylinders, but the bottom end of it is very strong. A Windsor will have thick cylinders, but they'll crack in half if you put too much power to them. So, with that being said, this particular engine block is standard bore Cleveland is a 4-inch bore. This one's at 4 inches and 15 thousandths. So we did the bare minimum in order to get the cylinders round and straight and still save wall thickness. If I remember correctly, this build has been around for a long time, but if I remember correctly, we did just a short fill block filler to strengthen those cylinders. I think I'm remembering that correct. Someone in another one of my videos asked if that makes an engine overheat. No, it does not make an engine overheat. Most of the heat in an engine is in the cylinder heads, so if you can keep the cylinder heads cool and the very top of the block cool, then you don't have to worry about water temperature. In a filled block, what you do have to worry about is oil temperature. So normally what we do with blocks, using blocks with that kind of block filler, hard block or Moroso Ceramasil, or not Ceramasil, but Moroso block filler, is that you'll need to run an oil cooler. So water temp does not get hot, oil temperature can creep up on you. So as you can see in this block here, it's already been painted. Cylinders are honed. You can see the bottoms of the cylinders have been dressed to take away any sharp edges there. It was honed. The mains were honed with ARP main studs, and you should be able to see in another picture here in a second that the flange where the oil pump bolts, that hole in the block has been gasket matched. Also, cam bearings in higher performance applications like to see a groove on the back of the bearing, and helps kind of restrict the oil, but it also will, if you drill it in a couple of spots, will direct oil to varying spots on the cam. Also, in the number one main, there's a very large hole next to a small hole, and we usually tap those large holes for a pipe plug because they're just not necessary. So everybody wants to know what it takes to make a Cleveland live at high RPMs. Basically not much if you do everything right. So like I said, gasket match, the oil pump flange, I like to fill that or tap that hole in the number one main. There's no external lines needed. None of the Moroso restrictors are needed. I do recommend a bushed lifter bore. The lifter bores share the main oil gallery on a big block Ford and on a Cleveland. So in certain situations you can starve the mains for oil just by over oiling the lifters. So I like to do bronze lifter bore bushings, and you can still see in this picture here. I know this picture has been up for about 8 minutes now, but as you can see the picture, we have bronze lifter bore bushings. This needs to be done correctly with a BHJ lifter bore fixture that locates and blueprints everything as it should be. If you just go through with a drill and a reamer and that sort of thing and just go nuts on the existing lifter bore hole, you're really not doing much at all. You're not doing it correctly. So for the crankshaft, we went with a super light scat 3.5-inch stroke forged crank. The super lights are obviously much lighter than the standard steel version. Saves multiple pounds and keeps the rotating weight down. So we use Federal Mogul main bearings in this one. You can see that on the previous picture. The scat crank, as you can see, the counterweights are shaped and knife edged really nice. and makes for a very strong foundation for an engine build. For the rotating assembly goodies, we went to Molnar for the rod and to Race Tech for the piston. I'll show some pictures of everything here. Believe it or not, the rod is a small block Chevrolet rod that's 6.400 in length. So very long rod, very short compression height on the piston. I think about 1.040 on the piston. So full custom piston with vertical gas ports and a 1mm, 1mm, 2mm ring pack. I think the compression ratio was it was between 10.5 and 11 to 1, so not a ton of compression on this one. And here's a shot of the pistons. Typical Cleveland piston, you can see the big intake valve relief moved up on the right side of the piston, and a real small exhaust valve relief. Some pistons don't even have exhaust valve reliefs because of the way that the Cleveland valves are laid out. And yeah, you can see the bronze lifter bore bushings here. So the piston, if you look at the measurements there, you can see that are around 4 inches and almost 10 thousandths of an inch. And if I remember correctly, we had to run just a little bit more piston to wall clearance because the block was filled. So it was probably more like 5 thousandths of an inch piston to wall clearance, which makes sense. Again, I'm running off of a memory from years and years ago when this engine was built, but all that makes sense to me. Now we'll turn our attention to the cylinder heads. As I mentioned earlier, these are just normal 4-barrel closed chamber cylinder heads. We installed bronze valve guides on everything, and used some Ferrea stainless valves. Obviously, valve job was completed. The deck surface was milled, and then we cut everything down for an adjustable. A rocker arm studs setup. The valve springs are very compact, small diameter, mainly dual valve springs for solid roller. I think the spring loads were around 270, 280 on the seat, and over 700 on open lift. So we used some titanium retainers and some mainly guide plates and ARP rocker studs, as you can see. So then the heads were mated to the block. We used some standard Velcro head gaskets. The camshaft is one of my custom solid roller camshafts, fairly healthy on low regression. In this particular instance on this dyno day, I did swap cams in the middle of the day, and I will say that my cam was 28 horsepower over a custom cam that was provided by another custom cam supplier. So that made me feel very good about myself. We used some Crowler stainless rocker arms, and kind of cheaped out on a stud girdle, which it probably really ought to had one. But I planned on adding one if I kept the engine. Someone bought the engine, so didn't get to install that. But very robust, hard to tear up rocker arm. If you're going to run a non-shaft rocker arm, those would be my rockers of choice. A little bit further work done, as you can see. I think I used a brand new timing cover for this engine, along with a front sump Milodon oil pan and a Frostbite electric water pump that's made by Holley. The intake manifold is a Holley strip dominator that had been vapor blasted to get it back to original finish. What an excellent intake manifold. It is absolutely hard to beat a strip dominator. So just to back up a little bit, no port work whatsoever done to the cylinder heads. No rubbing whatsoever, just a good valve job, good valves. No port work done to this strip dominator. So we'll be going over the results here in a minute, and it'll just prove how good of a platform, how good of a foundation the 351 Cleveland was. I usually spend a little bit trying to lay out what I want the engine to look like. To me, an engine should look as good as it runs, and so I spend time mocking up different valve cover combinations and which carb I'm going to use and that sort of thing. Kind of helps with the planning stages. We did not use those Moroso valve covers, and I didn't use that Da Vinci carburetor either, but I just usually go through different scenarios to get the look that I want to get. And we ended up with this look right here. So that's the finished engine. The Moroso valve covers were the ones that you usually see with a gold anodized or whatever. I found a set, had the valve covers re-chromed, having trouble speaking English. MSD distributor with a black cap, and a super sucker. I think it looks like a 2-inch super sucker that we used. So nice looking engine there. Cleveland is one of the best running engines ever, and they're always fun to put together. And here's a shot of the engine on the dyno getting ready to fire up. We ended up using the 2-inch super sucker adapter from a 4500 to a 4150, and we used a Holley dominator with some skirted boosters. So instead of, I think this one was a 1050, it was skirted down, and the CFM was down around 900 or 950 if I remember correctly. So we'll go over the dyno results here. As you can see, the RPM on the left hand side, so we were pulling to 8,000. It looks like we needed to pull maybe a little bit higher. I can't remember that far back. A lot of the times we will pull higher RPM just to see where the engine is peaking, and then just pull to that peak. But it was going to 8,000, and probably if you were in a racing scenario, you'd want to shift it, about 500 RPM higher. So oil temperature did not creep up during the pull. Water temperature, we were keeping it a little bit cooler just for the sake of not getting the engine hot, which is kind of hard on them when you're pulling them down and lugging them down. And we usually try to keep things on the racier engines. We usually try to keep the water a little bit cool. If you were drag racing this engine, most likely you would not get the water temp up, to 880, 190, that sort of thing. Oil pressure kept going up. Air fuel ratios, lean is mean for the most part. 13-to-1 is a good spot to be in. The engine made right at 615 horsepower at 8,000 RPM with 468 pound-feet of torque. If I remember correctly, we pulled the airflow hood down over the carburetor on a following pull and got about 620 horsepower. So I don't know of any, and I'm not trying to start a brand war or anything, but I don't know of any Chevrolet 350s that could make this kind of horsepower with unported heads and a bolt-on intake and that sort of thing. You just don't see these kinds of numbers from essentially anything else. This would be a stout engine if it were a big block, and I know that we're pulling some RPMs, but 615, 620 horsepower from an 11-to-1 engine with unported intake and cylinder heads is a pretty good feat. So just just a really impressive engine. And we're going to listen to a dyno video now, and then I'll have some closing remarks. Just a strong, high-end, high RPM running engine. Sounds very good. So I had plans initially of trying some different things on the engine, but as you do, you get to talking to people, and they're like, "Hey, what would you want to sell that engine?" So I did end up selling it. The gentleman that bought it owns the 434 cubic inch cleaver that I featured in a video from a few weeks back, and he bought this for his Fox body Mustang. So that necessitated the use of a new Fox body oil pan. We changed some things around. He didn't want the strip dominator intake. He wanted a new, brand new torquer. So changed all that stuff out. While I had all that off, I took time to check everything out, make sure everything was looking really good on the pistons and the way everything was burning at the top. Also, when I pulled the oil pan off, I went ahead and checked the bearing clearance, or not the bearing clearances, but checked to see how the bearings were doing. As you can see from the rod bearings, you can still see my mite tracks on the mains and the rod bearings. Zero wear, just a really well sorted out engine that would have lived a very long time. So if we wanted to do a where are they now type video, this engine was sold to my customer. Like I initially said, he kept it for several years and didn't do anything with it, and eventually sold it to Tim Halstead with Drag Boss Garage. He's got his own YouTube channel. So the engine is he's changed oil pans, he's ported an intake, he's done some different things to put it down in his wife's Mustang for a drag race engine. So be interesting to see what kind of ETs she knocks off with this. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching these videos. You guys seem to favor the one and done type video where we start from the beginning and go to the end in one video. I'm getting far more views on those type videos than the assembly videos. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop the assembly videos, but I may do more of these since it's a little bit easier for me to do, and I've already got the pictures and all the data in front of me, so it's kind of an easier video to shoot. But thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out. Hit that like button and post a comment or two down below. Alright guys, hope you're having a good week. If I don't talk to you before the beginning of the year, Happy New Year to you, and I'll talk to you soon.